Hi everyone, welcome back. Adam here. Now we're going to talk about types of questions that you can use because what I usually get uh, when people don't watch this video is they come out with 15 or 20 yes or no questions, and those are not helpful because over the past 100 or 200 years of social science, we've arrived at some pretty straightforward, useful types of questions that people are used to seeing on questionnaires. And I'm going to tell you all about them right now so that you can pick them and use the correct one for the right type of information that you're trying to get at. So let's start with open-ended questions. These are questions that allow people to respond in their own words, express their feelings, expand on ideas. And so an example might be, what aspects of the wildlife sciences program best prepared you for the current position? And then you could just type a little paragraph about that. And so these are really helpful, okay? They allow you to get at information that you may not have been smart enough to ask in one of your prepared questions that we'll talk about later. And so these are often good to have, but some things that you need to know that are drawbacks. The first is that it's incredibly labor intensive. You would not want to have a 20 question questionnaire of all open-ended questions because it would wear the person out that's taking the questionnaire. They'd be like, I'm tired of typing, and then they would quit. It's also very difficult for you on your end as the researcher because you then have to read and retype and code, if you get 50 responses, 50 different paragraphs, and so it just ends up being a whole lot of work. But sometimes they're useful. And so a tip is if you're going to have an open-ended question, put it at the end of the questionnaire towards the end so that people can be prompted by your previous questions. And then if there's anything that they want to add that you didn't ask, they can then type that. It also is discouraging if the first question is open-ended because again, that's a lot of work. And if I am taking a survey, if I being like the general survey taker, and I've answered 20 questions and I get to the end, then I'm more likely to do that open-ended question because I'm like, I've invested a lot in this survey. I really want them to know what I think. I'm going to type this in. Versus if you put it right up front at the top of the survey, I'd be like, man, this survey is going to be a lot of work, and then I quit. So because I'm a lazy survey taker. So some other types of closed-ended questions, I guess you would call them, we're going to go through here now, starting with ranking. And this is just what it sounds like. You just force people to rank stuff. So they get 5 things here: studying, socializing, volunteering, working at a part-time job, and exercising. And so you rank them from 1, spending the most time, to 5, spending the least amount of time. And that's pretty good because it forces people to pick a side, put things together. So some drawbacks to this one: you would not want to rank, 30 things from 1 being the most to 30 being the least, because that becomes really tedious and also difficult. And I can't remember, like that. So keep it to a small amount whenever you're doing ranking. The next one is a checklist. This is one that I feel like doesn't get enough love, but it could be as simple as circle or check all possible answers that are provided. The respondent is asked to choose one or choose all that apply. And so, for an example here is, how did you finance Virginia Tech? Your Virginia Tech education. Choose all that apply, and you would check. Oh, I got money from my parents. I got a student loan. I did work study. I worked off campus at Firehouse Subs, whatever. And you always want to have an other at the end, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And so this is just another one. This one may be appropriate for having 20 or 30 or 50 things, because then I can read through them and check off all that apply, as opposed to just giving me 5 options. And I'm like, wait a minute, you didn't list mine. So all right, here's some other types. Scaled items. These are very, very common because they do like a really good job of parsing people's feelings, okay? And so imagine if, this is what most people do wrong. Again, they ask yes, no questions. And so imagine if I was like, the English curriculum at Bucknell University adequately prepared me for my current position. Yes, no. And then I was like, no. What does that tell you? I mean, it tells you that, like, you're not adequately prepared, but it doesn't give you any nuance at all. Like, we can't, like, are they just emphatically no, or are they just sort of meh no? What if I said yes? Are they out there doing, a jam up job in the world? Are they struggling? So these 5 scaled items, called a Likert scale, help parse and make it uh, a much more nuanced bit of information that you'll get from this. So I can be anything from strongly agreeing to strongly agreeing. And in the middle, you can be neutral or have no opinion. And that gives you a much more, again, nuanced information about where your population is on a given question. So whenever you're writing scaled items, here are some tips. You want to use positively worded or negatively worded items consistently. And what I mean by this is if you imagine a page with 20 different questions, all different scales, and they are all worded in the affirmative, do you enjoy this? Do you enjoy, this? Like, what? And then all of a sudden you threw in a negatively worded one. Do you not enjoy this? Then that would be really, you might what we're getting at here is that somebody might miss that not, the thing that makes it negative, and then they answer your question wrong, and then that question is invalid for you. So if you're going to use positively worded items or negatively worded items, never have just one, and then try to keep them together so that people don't get tripped up. So use an odd number of responses along the continuum to allow for a neutral response. I will tell you that there's some debate on this. Some people think this is the way because some people may just feel meh and they need that no opinion neutral in the middle that we talked about here, number 3. Others will say, no, knock that out, keep 1 and 2 and 4 and 5, and then that way it forces people to agree or disagree. But I think that the more options that you have, the better, okay? So an example, like a funny example would be if you have a politically charged sort of like imagine, if you're gauging people's perceptions about the Keystone XL pipeline coming through the forest or whatever, and you took out that 3, and then it sounds like whenever you report your findings, everybody agrees and disagrees, and you have a very polarized sort of response. But if you kept that 3, you may find that 40% of people don't care, and that's really valid. And so just something to think about whenever you're writing your questions. Also, your anchors may be different. Your anchors are these things: strongly agree, disagree. You may, word them according to the question. So you would never be like, how often do you X? And then it would be strongly agree to strongly disagree. And you would think, wow, that's really awkward. So you can use frequently to never, very good to very poor, and make up some words there in the middle. But you do want to keep your items short because the longer your sentence, the more complicated it typically becomes and the more likely people are to get it wrong. So that's the thing that you want to try to keep it short. Here's another tip that people do wrong all the time on this is that they will ask a question here, the curriculum, what they would word it as, does the English curriculum at Bucknell University adequately prepare you for your current position, ? And then you would have this strongly agree. And that makes no sense, right? Because you can't strongly agree or disagree with a question. So whenever you write these items for your questionnaire, you need to write this part of it as a statement. So this English curriculum prepared me for my current position. That's a statement, and then I can respond to it with one of these things. All right, let's move on. So categorical, I think, is the last one that we're coming to. And sometimes people do fall into a category. So you can, yes, no questions. Again, those are not often useful, but sometimes they are. So like male or female, undergrad or graduate, Virginia Tech graduate, UF graduate, Republican, Democrat. These are all categories that have no continuum, and so you would fall into one or the other. And so that this is an example of a type that you can have. All right, here are some considerations whenever you're doing categorical. This is one that people do wrong all the time. Questions that are on a continuum should stay on a continuum if they're directly analyzed. And what I mean by that is age, for example, is a continuum, all right? You can be 1 to 100 and you can be anywhere in between. They're not categories necessarily in the same way that Democrat and Republican is categorical. So like what people would do is they would, this is a terrible example, is they would say, please check your age. And then they would have 1 to 100, you know, they're out listed with a little checkbox next to one of them. You never see that happen because age is a continual variable, right? You know, make sure that what you're asking matches up. The other thing is that categories need to be exhaustive and mutually exclusive, and I'll explain what that means right now. So here is a thing that is not mutually exclusive here. So you have, you know, if you're asking somebody the number of hours spent studying per week, and you have 18 to 21, 21 to 24, 24 to 27, and I check 18 to 21, you know, like 20, like if I am studying exactly 21 hours, I could go in two different categories. People screw this up all the time. So make sure that your categories are mutually exclusive, meaning one, you must be in one and not the other. So over here is better, 18 to 21, 22 to 25. Exhaustive means that every option is available. And remember how earlier I said always make sure whenever you're giving somebody a couple different options to pick that you include an other where they can write it in. Without that other in the write-in, that is not an exhaustive item. You have limited them to the 5 things that you think that they should pick. And so if they have something that they want to share that you did not think to list, then that means that that question is not exhaustive. So that's always why you need to have an other at the category. All right, this is super exciting, isn't it? All right, so other things to consider when you're putting together your questionnaire is that it needs to look nice and be easy to read. It can't be a mess because people get like turned off and they get you know, distracted by things and they get confused and then they just quit. And if people quit taking your survey, then you never get that information. So you never want to have no less than a 12-point font. Never want to have no less. How many negatives are in that? So, you know, make sure that your thing is legible. No Comic Sans, ever, ever. So try to stick to a font that people are used to, like Times, Arial, Courier. I would also add Calibri and Cambria. And then lastly, it's totally acceptable to have a pilot study, just a test of your instrument. You can get your friends to take it so that they can read it and think, man, this makes no sense to me. Or I have this thing that I want to add that you didn't give me a chance to add. Or this question forces me to pick a side that I don't feel like I have a side, you know. So you find out all kinds of good information when you pilot test. Whenever you send out your survey, fascinating facts, you first need to make initial contact with the person that's going to take your survey. This can be as simple as the instructions at the top of the survey. Make them short and to the point. So that because people aren't going to read a whole lot, they really don't, like nobody wants to take your survey ever. So the more short and to the point you can make it, the better you're going to get. If you can manage to identify the person by name, you know, in a letter that covers the survey or in the email that sends it out, you get a higher response rate because they think, oh God, this person knows me. They think I'm special. They know my name. They really want my opinion. I'm going to complete their survey. I don't know why that works, but it does. You also need to try to convince the respondent that participation is important. This is a very important research project that I'm working on. It's going to be helpful to the university or to, you know, the ag industry. If you can convey that, then they're more likely to respond. You also always want to, if your survey is going to be confidential, you want to ensure that, you know, their confidentiality, like their responses, will not be shared or at least not connected with their name. And then finally, the last thing that you can do, and this is a real thing that works, is give them a deadline for return of the questionnaire. Because if you leave it open, you're like, please return my questionnaire at your leisure. They may never do it. They'll never get around to it. But if you're like, please return my questionnaire by Friday, they'll think, oh man, this is something that I should do now, or maybe I'll do it in the morning tomorrow. And then it makes it, you know, something that's more on their radar. So again, summary of steps. Thanks for sticking with me here. First, determine your objective. What is it that you want to learn? Figure out what the mode is going to be. If it's going to be electronic, by paper. You're going to construct your questionnaire. You're going to pilot test it. Write the initial communication, which would just be as simple as the paragraph at the top of your questionnaire. Send the questionnaire, follow up, and then finally analyze the results. In this class, we used to actually send the survey and analyze it, and then I thought, you know what, this isn't a research class. There's no need for you to learn how to analyze data here. What we're focused on is writing clear questions that help you achieve your objective. With that said, hopefully you all feel prepared to go out and do that. Take a look at the assignment, bring any questions that you have to class. This is definitely one that requires a lot of sort of hands-on. Glad to help you all with it. So thank you very much for your attention, and we'll see you in class.